Hello! Welcome to the first ever episode of Life by the Fireside. My name's Stephen, and I'll be your host. And this is Dr. Fred. He is our chief researcher and the cosiest ninja that ever lived. Here on Life by the Fireside, we'll be taking you on a journey to explore life in all its glory, from the smallest bacteria to the enormity of the blue whale. But where to start?
Well, why reinvent the wheel when you can stand on the shoulders of giants?
Life has been categorized for hundreds of years using a system developed by a guy called Carl Linnaeus, which categorizes life into different groups or ranks. This is the study of taxonomy. Each taxonomic rank gets more and more specific as they go, and our videos will be following this system, starting with the broadest, hence this video encompassing all life itself, and working our way down to the most specific, the species. Here's how it works. This episode is about the broadest category there is, simply life. Every living thing fits into this category. Next up is the domains. There are 3 domains of life: bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. Me, you, Fred, we all fit into the domain eukaryote. As we go on, we'll make videos for all the other taxonomic ranks, and these videos will be linked in the description of each relevant video. Taking Dr. Fred as an example, we have life, domain eukaryotes, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Carnivora, family Felidae, genus Felis, species Catus. Now, life doesn't fit into these perfect little boxes, even though we might want it to. So what we do is sometimes we'll add in subcategories. For example, with Fred here, we have the suborder Feliformia and the subfamily Felinae. Now, there are currently over 8 million named species on the planet. So when we do get down to that point, we really will have our work cut out for us, won't we, Fred? But don't worry, it's not as confusing as it sounds at all. So let's just get started with this episode and the most broad category that there is, life itself.
So what is life? Surprisingly, that can be a difficult question to answer. There are some things that clearly are alive, like an elephant or a sunflower. Things that are clearly not alive, like a stone or an umbrella. But then there are some things that are a bit unclear, like viruses or zombies.
Aristotle was one of the first people to try to define life back in 350 BC, and since then there's been near constant debates over what actually defines life. It's weird because everyone can easily identify something that is alive, yet nailing down a definition has proven so difficult. NASA, back in the 90s, proposed that life is a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. Not a bad definition.
And NASA really do need a strong definition of life,
seeing as they're the ones most likely to find life beyond our planet someday. This definition, however, doesn't leave room for life forms found in all the best sci-fi shows. Artificial intelligence. No real chemical reactions to speak of in machines. A way of assessing living things that's worked out quite well in the past has been to look at different characteristics that life forms share, on this planet at least. And by no means is this an exhaustive list. It is subject to change. And man, this whole episode is just one giant asterisk, so bear that in mind. Now, the first of these defining traits we're going to look at is responding to a stimulus. Now, if Fred here is in fact alive, then he should respond to this stimulus. Just about. But yeah, he is a life form, and so he's responding to an external stimulus. Now, I am also alive, so I can respond to maybe an internal stimulus and eat an apple. Now, it's pretty clear to see when animals respond to stimulus, but there's more to life than animals. Take this basil plant, for example, just bought in a local shop, nothing special about it. But if I turn it, you can see that it has a bend to it. All of these leaves are facing this way, and that's because I deliberately left it facing the window and didn't turn it. Now this is you're right, Fred. This is the plant reacting to an external source, the sunlight, and bending all of its leaves towards the light, which I think is just fascinating.
Another characteristic shared by living things is that they maintain something called homeostasis. So what's that? It's basically keeping things running at an optimum level. For example, as humans, our bodies function most effectively at a temperature in and around 37 degrees Celsius. We use a lot of energy to maintain that temperature constantly, but if it were to get significantly hotter in here, my body would start to sweat in order to cool down. There are other ways to deal with this problem, such as how dogs and birds will pant in the heat to cool off because, well, they don't have sweat glands. Homeostasis is more than just temperature, though. It's making sure your blood pressure stays within a certain range, that your blood glucose levels stay in a good range, that you have sufficient water in your body, or that you keep within a certain pH range. All life forms do this right down to single-celled organisms like bacteria, who use their cell membranes to regulate what goes in or out of the cell.
This cat loves the fire. I've never seen anything like it. He'll stare straight into the fire for hours. Now, all this optimization, regulation, it requires energy in order to function. So, that's another characteristic of life that we've observed, is the ability to acquire and use energy. This one has a fancy term called metabolism. So all life forms require energy in order to do their basic functions. And there are two main ways that life forms acquire their energy.
Autotrophs, as you can maybe tell from the auto in the word, make their own food, either from sunlight or chemicals. The most well-known examples are things we see every day. Plants. There are other autotrophs such as algae or some archaea and bacteria like cyanobacteria. If it makes food without having to eat other living things, then it's an autotroph. On the opposite end, we have the heterotrophs. These are organisms that need to eat other organisms as food in order to get their energy. For the most part, this refers to ourselves and other animals on our branch of the family tree. For me, this is a wonderful part of being alive. I can't imagine going out in the sun and suddenly no longer being hungry. Food is just too pleasurable a way to get our energy. Imagine never knowing the joy of a really good burger. I shudder at the thought.
So yeah, Fred's gone. He found it way too hot in here. That external stimulus was too much, so he had to get away from the fire. So if you don't see him, then that's why. He's just over there though. Whoa, careful, that's a naked flame. So, a large portion of life forms feed on other life forms in order to get their energy. If the number of living things were finite, then that would have spelt the end for life a long time ago. Thankfully, however, we have another trait of life, which is the ability to reproduce.
This is so fundamental to the process of life that it's easy to overlook what a marvel it is. The oceans don't create more of themselves, mountains don't replicate, stars don't create new stars. It's a phenomenon unique to life. There are two main ways that organisms reproduce. You have the oldest form, asexual reproduction, where cells create basically clones of themselves, and sexual reproduction, where male and female parts of the organism come together to create an organism that has traits of both parents.
So why do life forms do this? Well, an unfortunate fact of life is that we all have a certain shelf life, a length of time where the complex organic machine will not really work as well as it once did. Reproducing helps the species to flourish long after individuals have perished. Reproduction is such a huge thing when it comes to life that there are other traits kind of wrapped up inside of it. So let's just go through the whole lot together. All life forms have a genetic code, the blueprint for how to grow and create yourself. And then also, all life forms have the ability to adapt and to evolve. Adapting and evolving are traits that we see more on a macro level than on an individual level. And this, coupled with sexual reproduction, is the main reason why we have such rich biodiversity on this planet.
Asexual reproduction, or mitosis, is the earliest form of reproduction and is the preferred method for single-celled organisms. Take a look at this heliozoa. This footage has been sped up to help us to see what's going on. But look at how the one cell splits into two daughter cells. Each one a clone of the other. There is no parent cell. You can't tell which one was there before because neither were, yet they both were. When you get down to the microscopic level, life gets pretty weird, but beautiful. Once life forms developed sexual reproduction, it became a huge contributor to biodiversity. If you don't believe me, check this out. Here, I have a blob of red paint. If I want to produce a new blob of paint via mitosis, or making two clones, for example, I can split the original like so, and make two. Now, with sexual reproduction, we have one species, we'll call it green, but there's two different greens, one representing male and one representing female. These two come together to make a third offspring with characteristics of both the male and the female. This leads to lots of diversity, as you can see here with the three different colors of green. It also gives more room for mistakes to be passed on and become advantageous traits. These biological mistakes are basically like Bob Ross happy little accidents in real life.
We don't make mistakes, we have happy accidents.
Some life forms find that these mistakes actually help the organism survive and thrive better in their natural environment. This in turn leads to a greater probability of survival and therefore reproduction until so many organisms have the change that a new species is born. Over a very long time, of course. We call this survival of the fittest. Natural selection is another trait that comes with sexual reproduction. As there are two life forms needed to reproduce, choice becomes a factor. All organisms want their offspring to thrive, and so select their mate according to how fit they are to survive. We often see this in nature as either the female being choosy about their male mate, birds of paradise being a prime example of this, or take me out.
No like it, no like.
Or on the other hand, we have males who will fight each other to ensure the strongest have the right to mate and have their genes continue. The changes that get passed down in organisms are small pieces of the genetic code. We call this code deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. Everything alive has it, and it's slightly different in every organism, but more about that later. These traits are what get passed down during sexual reproduction. When a species fails to reproduce before the last individuals die, then that species becomes extinct, never to return. Sadly, many species are facing this dilemma currently due to the actions of humans.
Many people pit humans against nature in this narrative. However, we are an inextricable part of life, and what we do is completely natural for our species. Now, I'm not giving any excuses here for anything. I'm simply pointing out that we are woven into the very fabric of life. We are not above it, below it, we're not removed from it either. Just as the termite will build their hill, humans will do what suits them best and makes their lives better. And sometimes, unfortunately, this can mean that we put the needs of our own species above the needs of others.
The final piece of the puzzle when talking about characteristics of life are all the pieces that make up the puzzle, the cells. The cell is the most basic thing considered to be alive today. If it doesn't have cells, it's not alive. Sorry, viruses. Life forms can be as simple as one individual cell or as complex as an elephant with countless cells working together. There are many different types of cells. Broadly speaking, there are two main types of cell, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. I'm not going to speak about those distinctions here, that's for a future video. Instead, I'm going to look at the things all cells have in common. All cells have a cell membrane. This is the outer part of the cell, the barrier that holds everything inside. So what is inside? Well, all cells need something to stop the membrane just falling in on top of everything and deflating. This stuff is called cytoplasm. It's a jelly-like stuff, mainly made of water, that gives the cell its shape and lets the inner stuff float around and do its work. Every cell has DNA. Where it's kept in the cell varies, but every cell has it. What is DNA? It's the blueprint for the organism, the way to build and maintain all the cells that make up the organism. I'll give a very brief rundown of how it works because this process incorporates the other things all cells have in common too, RNA and ribosomes. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is, as the name suggests, a type of acid. It's a molecule that's extremely long and thin. It has that classic double helix structure that we all know and love, which means it looks like a spiraling ladder. The steps on this ladder are made up of 4 different kinds of chemicals. For short, we say A, T, C, and G. One side of the helix can be read in a great big line, like a line of code, a genetic code. The other side has the corresponding chemical. A matches with T, and C matches with G. They fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Information can be coded in this line, and it is millions of letters long. If I wrote the 3 letters C-A-T, you would get a clear picture in your mind what I was talking about. In the same way, DNA gives a clear picture to the cell of what to build. Who reads this picture? Well, that's where RNA comes in, ribonucleic acid. This little molecule is only a single helix and is much shorter than DNA. It copies sections of the DNA genetic code and then is off on its merry way. Where's it headed? For one of the ribosomes. These little molecules are the builders of the cell. They build proteins using amino acids. The cell uses up to 20 different amino acids to make proteins, and there are millions of different types of proteins that can be built. Each one has to be made in exactly the right way, or it won't work. The ribosome reads the letters in the RNA 3 at a time. The order of the letters tells the ribosome which amino acid to use next in the building process, and where to stick it. In the end, you have a finished protein molecule that can go on to do a million different jobs. It's pretty amazing. The more we understand the genetic codes of species, the more we've been able to isolate parts of the code, or genes, that do a multitude of things. This has led to taking out the gene for creating seeds in grapes, or making fish that glow in the dark. These genetically modified forms of life are interesting, but controversial. Some people want to have genetically modified babies, while others worry about the implications of messing with the genetic code of species. What do you think? It's hard to agree with designer babies, but hard to disagree with seedless grapes.
Next up, we have a couple of segments that are going to be recurring throughout this series. And the first one of those is the human interaction segment. So what is it? Well, how do humans interact with life? And what does life mean to humans? So, most people are happy to be alive, I think. We are alive. And a lot of people have a genuine fascination with life and different life forms. We're constantly learning from life forms. We're studying different animals, and we can then use that information to make and replicate things like sonar and hydrophobic surfaces. We're always learning from nature. Not to mention that literally all of our food comes from living things. So, kind of a big deal. Next is the habitat segment. This is where I explain where a life form might live or where it might be found. And so for this, the most broad episode, where does life live? Yeah, you heard me. Where does life live? Well, it lives here. And only here. As far as we know, this is the only place where life lives. And it lives all over this planet. Like, seriously, everywhere. It's everywhere. Even places you wouldn't think. Zoom in on this microphone, you're gonna find life forms. The search for life on other planets is one of the most driving forces and burning questions of all humanity. Are we alone? As far as I'm concerned, we're not. We have millions of other life forms that we can learn from and make relationships with right here. Don't forget that. Get out into the world and enjoy the natural beauty that surrounds us. And whenever you're not doing that, and you have some free time, it would mean a lot to me if you could get yourself cozy, curl up, and join me to learn about life by the fireside. See you next time.